Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Top 10 Tips for Water Disaster. I am Kareem De Suza, Library Technical Assistant at the Preservation and Conservation Lab, Heritage Division, NALIS. We ask you at this time to keep your cameras off and your microphones muted. You are invited to type your questions into the chat for our question and answer segment at the end of this webinar. Let me introduce to you my co-facilitator, Danielle Fraser. Danielle has been a library conservator at the head of the NALIS PAC Lab since 2009. Danielle holds a master's in science and information studies and a certificate in advanced studies in conservation of library and archival materials from the University of Texas, Austin. She was a 2008 Conservation Fellow of the Library of Congress, Washington, D.C., has been a member of the American Institute for the Conservation and Library Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Danielle enjoys presenting papers at the annual meetings and regional associations, including ACREL and CREL. So I know she is excited to present alongside me today. Danielle?
Thank you, Kareem. Now, before we get into our top 10 tips, let me introduce our organization. The National Library and Information System Authority of Trinidad and Tobago, NALIS, is the country's coordinator of all library and information services. Beyond the Heritage Library, there are over 25 public libraries, 3 libraries in correctional institutions, libraries in secondary and primary schools, and special libraries in several government agencies, all administered by NALIS. Please visit our website, www.nalis.gov.tt, for more information about our services. We'll post a link in the chat of this webinar. Now, one of NALIS's key responsibilities is to promote and preserve national heritage information. The Heritage Library Division, located on the 2nd floor of the National Library Building, Port of Spain, Trinidad, helps NALIS fulfill the goal of acquiring, promoting, and preserving national heritage information. Special collections acquired or donated to the Heritage Library Division consist of mainly traditional library items created by or of interest to a significant person or organization of Trinidad and Tobago. I invite you to follow the Heritage Library Division on Facebook at NALIS HLDTT. See the link in the chat. The Preservation and Conservation Laboratory is responsible for ensuring the overall longevity of library materials, with attention to the Heritage Library Division and its collection of historical importance. The PAC Lab, which was officially commissioned in 2013, helps NALIS fulfill its role as the International Federation of Library Association and Institutions Preservation and Conservation, or IFLA PAC, Regional Center for the English-Speaking Caribbean. NALIS is a part of a network of 16 IFLA PAC centers around the globe, with the aim of providing knowledge and expert advice on preservation and conservation practices within their region, and to serve as IFLA's key area of work on safeguarding and promoting culture and heritage. We've continued our mission of raising awareness of preservation and conservation issues through our preservation webinar series. In case you missed any of our previous webinars, our previous seasons of this series, the link to the NALIS YouTube playlist will be posted in the chat. Now, let me formally introduce my co-facilitator, Mr. Kareem De Suza. Kareem started his work at NALIS in 2009. In 2010, he was appointed Library Technical Assistant of the Preservation and Conservation Laboratory, and he is one of the operators of the Way-2 freezers, which are book exterminator machines and a major activity of the PAC Lab. Kareem has executed several training sessions and exhibitions over the period of years. He has also presented at numerous PAC Lab events, including clinics, workshops, and tours. Kareem continues his BTech Higher National Diploma, HND in Creative Media Production at SBCS, School of Business and Computer Science, University of Greenwich, and holds a photography master's certificate also from SBCS. So over to you, Kareem.
Thank you so much, Danielle. So this year, as you know, we celebrated 10-year anniversary of the commissioning of the Preservation and Conservation Lab. Some of the activities were filled with numerous family heirlooms preservation clinics at public libraries throughout the NALIS system. We had in-person workshops and preservation webinars, as we are here today. So you want to follow the hashtag PACLabTurns10 on our social media channels to see how we celebrated and carried throughout this grand scheme of things. So it brings me great pleasure to close out the webinar series. This is our third season, if I'm corrected. And we're gonna implement top 10 tips for water disasters. So let's get into it. Starting off at number 10, we have stabilize the environment. When it comes to water disaster occurs, it's important to stabilize the environment. While many factors can impact our collections, the major environmental factors to consider when facing water disasters are temperature and relative humidity. Often when a water disaster occurs, there are power outages. This can raise the temperature of the building. So relative humidity, or RH, the amount of moisture in the air, increases after a period of time and according to the disasters. So I'm going to give you a little pointers or suggestions. You want to aim to lower the temperature and relative humidity by using dehumidifiers to pull moisture out of the air. Make sure your dehumidifier also has a hose drainage that will attract all the water and pull it outside of the building. You want to use electronic fans to circulate the air. Your mops, buckets, even water pumps may be necessary to remove standing water. Our next step shows the importance of stabilizing these environmental conditions. We move on to number 9. Number 9 is none other than our infamous issue we all encounter, mold. Mold outbreak can occur within 48 to 72 hours after a water disaster, sometimes sooner than 48 hours. So what is mold really? Mold is generally known as a fungus. Mold consists of different types of particles, and they can occur both indoors and outdoors. They produce spores which spread by flowing in the air. These spores are presented in both indoor and outdoor environments. So take note of me saying there's no way in preventing mold spores. So what does it look like? So you're seeing the fluffy stuff, the orange particles there on the book cover. So as I mentioned previously, there are different types of mold which can grow in various colors, black, orange as you see there. So you want to know, how does it begin? For mold to develop, the environmental condition must be suitable for germination. Spores will swell to germinate and extend and branch outwards as they continue to elongate. Through moisture is considered a major factor for mold. It needs the assistance of these other items, such as heat, stagnant air, and darkness for the mold to germinate and the process to begin. So here's some tips. Prevent and deactivate mold growth. This can only be done by stabilizing the environmental conditions. Dry or freeze wet collections to give time to deal with salvaging or cleaning the mold items. Clean with an alcohol-based solution, rubbing alcohol, ethanol alcohol to get rid of those spores. Remember to use gloves and protective wear when exposed to mold. Now, mold is not the only hazardous material when dealing with a water disaster, which brings me to number 8 on the countdown. We have contamination. When dealing with water disasters such as flooding, you will encounter a variation of debris and chemicals. Now, this can be toxic due to human waste, as you know, feces, sewage overflowing, which can cause fatal viruses. So when you're dealing with something such as a water disaster, I will strongly recommend you equip yourself by using personal protective equipment, as we all know it as PPE. So such as gloves, goggles, N95 masks, face masks, and shields. You want to reduce any risk of exposure it may require. I will require you to wear these safety items. Rolling on to number 7 on our list, we have handling wet items. Now, handling wet items can be difficult tasks and can cause further damage to your collection. When you have wet items, such as paper-based items, they tend to be very fragile and weak. So be careful when handling. That is important. Wear gloves before starting any disaster treatment. Do not force open a bound book or newspaper. This would cause further damage onto your item. You will want to utilize any support boards to lift and carry items to and fro your workstation. Use trays or bins, once again, to carry items, large volumes of items, to your workstation. Remember to carefully assist your items, and you should be working in a clear environment away from disaster. Reaching in at number 6 on the list, we have document the damage. So documenting damage is an important part of dealing with disasters. Your record of the damage will follow the disaster, will play a major part and role in fulfilling insurance claims, or even just making sure what's in your database, so you have an upkeep of what it was that got damaged in the disaster. So even if you're committing to your experience of those who wanting to assist, make sure that your colleagues are also recording and documenting what other damages that occurred to your collection. So, like I said, you want to assign your colleague or something like that. So assign a group to document the damage. So you'll have like a group of 5 people writing out various items that are wet. Then you want to have to capture with the written or visual using a notebook, a camera, a phone, or anything that's available. Record the catalog numbers if possible. So you want to track the movement of all items during salvage collections. It may be relocated for safety concerns, or access the dry space for the process. Now, we are midway through the list, and I have to pass it over to Danielle, as she will close out the remaining of the countdown. So I want to thank you all. Danielle, over to you.
Thank you, Kareem. Now, in at number 5, we have supplies for response. Now, to respond effectively to a water disaster, you have to have on hand some essential supplies. These can make the difference between a minor emergency or extensive damage. Now, as an institution, these supplies should be secured because we want to avoid them getting used in our everyday operations. We don't want that those items we have get caught up in the things that we do daily. However, don't have these items so locked away that the keys are inaccessible. The keys to your response kit must be accessible at all times, even outside of working hours. So I have a quick question, and I'd like you to put the answer in the chat. What do you think would be the 3 top items that should be included in a response kit for responding to a water disaster? You have water happening at your library, perhaps even at home. What are the things that you would need to have quickly on hand to do that first initial response? Let's see those answers in the chat. What are some of the items that you think are going to be necessary for dealing with a water disaster? What are the things that will be essential? You can enter your answers into the chat. We see bucket by V. Philip, mop, gloves, bucket again. Yes, someone has flashlight. Interesting that is one of your top three with respect to dealing with a water disaster. Let's see, what do you think you would need to have on hand? Materials for absorbing water, great. And so someone recommended cloths or towels, excellent. Let's see, any other suggestions as to what would be those items that we would need to have on hand? I wonder if your list would be the same as my list. Let's see, someone says bags, garbage bags, great. Waterproof bags, right? Because we're dealing with wet items, that's smart. Excellent. We have a lot of wonderful suggestions, so thank you so very much. Let's make a comparison. Let's see if the list we came up with is one that works for you. Someone says fans for drying out items and cameras to document. Water boots. Yes, I could see that one. Definitely. Let's take a quick look. Thank you for your responses. And these are just a few of the recommendations that we have. And of course, you would see that we shared the same ideas on what are some of the things that would be necessary. We have here plastic sheeting, because we may want to quickly cover or get something protected if there's a roof leak or something happening above. Getting unprinted newsprint, paper towels, sponges, those are all things that are going to be great for helping to absorb the water very quickly. For that plastic sheeting, don't forget to have on hand the duct tape and scissors. We often put tape, but not scissors to allow us to actually cut through the tape. And so have those things on hand. You mentioned waterproof bags. I put garbage bags here on our list. Even wax paper comes in handy for just helping to wrap items that you may be looking to freeze or move aside so that they're not sticking to each other. Flashlights, I did include flashlights because sometimes we may have a power outage during that water disaster, or perhaps power has issues. So having a flashlight on hand is going to be helpful. Notebook and pencils, Kareem mentioned documenting, so having that on hand will be good. Someone mentioned a camera, that's also a good thing. We had plastic and rubber gloves, plastic boots, mop and bucket, kind of core and essential, goggles, some caution tape, or at least signs so that you can move people away from the space that's affected. They may not know that you have a water disaster going on there. Dust mask or facial mask. And then I also put in electric fans, wet dry vac, and dehumidifier. And those, I put an asterisk next to them because you have to have access to electricity in order to operate the electric fans, the wet dry vacuum, and the dehumidifier as you are carrying out the salvage. Now, speaking of access, here is number 4. Keep in mind that you may have limited access after this disaster, and the building may be inaccessible due to dangerous conditions around or inside. Maybe the building is okay, but access to the building might be blocked from moving water or perhaps misplaced wildlife. How many times have we seen those videos of snakes and potential alligators or caiman washing up where they ought not to have been following a disaster. There's a possibility of even having some live electrical circuits, which again, electricity and water don't mix. So having that in a space will make it dangerous and will have you limit the access. Now, because of those dangerous conditions, you may have to wait until emergency officials do their job and are able to declare the space safe for re-entering. Now, this is where it becomes important to build relationships with our emergency responders before disasters even occur, so that they know who from your institution is really the one responsible, making those decisions as to who would get access immediately after the disaster. Now, even if you have access to the space, based on how widespread that disaster is, there's a possibility that utilities like electricity, communication technology, the phone, the Wi-Fi, running water, those things may be restricted. And so you have to consider that there may be the need to temporarily set up your operations off-site or at a different location. Now, given limited access, this next tip is an important one that you must consider: prioritizing. Making it to number 2, we have prioritizing your collection for salvage. This is a difficult aspect of emergency planning. Now, the assessment of your collection, in order for you to determine or to assign collection salvage priorities, must happen before the crisis. Now, if we wait until when the disaster occurs in order to make those decisions, we are also now potentially delaying the process, because you now have to include that as part of your decision making. Making it in advance allows you to with a clear head, identify the items that are called your high priority items. Now, how do you make those decisions? Of course, as librarians, as archivists, as persons who are in museums, as people at home, we want everything to be saved. But you must understand that there's the potential that you may not have as much help as it relates to salvaging. So salvage process must be one that is prioritized. And so how do we make those decisions? Now, deciding which items are considered high priority can vary depending on a lot of considerations. First up, do the items support the work of the institution? For instance, we would want to still be able to pay our bills, still be able to deal with financial issues and payment of salaries. So anything that's related to that would, I think, make it onto a high priority. It supports the work and the operations of the organization. And so those are items that, beyond just our collections, would make it onto this high priority list. Are the items unique, or will it be difficult to replace? Are these items that are just one-off, the only surviving copy, or the very personalized, customized, handwritten original? Then we would consider that as a high priority item. It's going to be impossible to replace something that's original. Do the items have high monetary value? Have we paid quite a lot of money to receive those items, to have them included in our collection? Then that may be a consideration for tagging them as high priority. Are the materials fragile? Are they potentially the type of materials that once they encounter a water disaster, that they, beyond just getting wet, that they could potentially deteriorate even further? Well, then those are potentially items that we may want to consider as high priority. Are those items on loan or deposited by an external party? Perhaps we've borrowed items from another institution during our interlibrary loan. Maybe we have an exhibition on where we've borrowed items from a ministry or someone external. If those are items that do not belong to us, we have a right to ensure that those are safe during our salvage. And are there any legal requirements on what must be retained? Are we bound by law to be sure that we have these records still in our collection? And these may very well be things as they relate to our financial issues, as well as even employment. There are a lot of documents that by law we are bound to retain. And so that makes it a very high priority item. Now, once we've prioritized the collection, you can then create a color-coded map identifying the location of the high priority items. This gives a quick guidance or quick reference for accessing the high priority items during the disaster. And it's one that should be available, allowing for everyone to look at and know exactly, quickly offhand, shelf AB, shelf XY, those are the items that are considered as high priority because it's located and color-coded on a map. Now, our tip in the second position on our list might be a surprising one: mental health. No matter how well you prepare for a disaster, you can still feel distress when going through it. So it's important to take care of your mental and emotional health during a disaster. Now, it's human nature that we experience a variation of strong emotions following a disaster or crisis. You may show signs of stress, for instance. Now, here are things that have been valuable for us when dealing with a disaster. We have to take care of our body. You want to be sure that you're getting enough sleep, enough rest, and you're eating healthy meals and snacks. Even movement of your body can help release those extra stress hormones that are building up and causing you to experience those signs of stress. Now, stay connected with others, like that trusted family friend or family member. Stay informed of any developments that are associated with the disaster. You want to be sure that if there's something going on in the environs that are near to your location, that you are aware if it's going to be impacting what's going on with your salvage operations. And take regular breaks. Regular breaks can allow you to decompress from the stressful and crisis moment. And you can also practice some relaxation techniques like exercise, deep breathing, stretching, and massage therapy. All of these will be helpful for helping to reduce the stress that your body is going through. And coming in at number one, drum roll please, we have write and work the plan. Now, do not overlook the value of planning your response to emergencies and disasters. The main goal of a disaster plan is to provide preparedness information and give instructions for the initial response and long-term steps for the recovery effort. And so, the key to a successful disaster plan is preparation and practice. It is as simple as that. Preparation is going to involve taking measures to prevent and protect through risk mitigation. This will help you consider what are the ways that my collection can be potentially damaged following a water disaster, and what steps can I put to help minimize the impact of that disaster on my collection. Now, putting steps in place to respond with suitable actions is what this is all about. So your plan would include details about the disaster team, those who are going to be called on to move into action when that disaster happens. It details the actions that need to take place during as well as after the disaster. You should have that salvage priority list included here. The list of emergency tools and supplies should also be included, as well as their location. And when I say practice, the practice part comes in with respect to your disaster plan, including training, ensuring that those who are involved in helping to salvage your after your disaster are trained on how to operate and put those disaster actions into reality. And also having regular reviews and revisions of the plan is important. Now, for more information on some of the tips we covered, and this was really, tips are just short and sweet, quick. We encourage you to get more details, to view our preservation webinars from our preservation webinar series on the NALIS YouTube channel. There's Dealing with Mold, which gives guidelines for library and archival collections. Care and Handling highlighted the procedures that we should use when we're handling, storing, and displaying our collection items. A representative from IFLA presented on the risk register for documentary heritage. And so that webinar is one that would be of importance for any institution who is collecting documentary heritage. We also presented Reducing the Risk, which was a 3-part series focused on identifying and mitigating risks that our collections can face. Now, be sure to also check out Write That Disaster Plan. We put into there guidelines on preparing a disaster plan for library and archival collections, both being able to complete an extensive disaster plan, as well as if you just want something quick that you can do immediately, we have all of those options available in Write That Disaster Plan. So I thank you for joining us for our webinar, Top 10 Tips for Water Disasters. We'll open the question and answer segment now. If we have any questions coming in, we'll get them answered. Thank you. Kareem, are you available? Are you able to just recap from your end? Just quickly run through the numbers from 10 to number 1.
10 to number 1. Okay.
So you're just giving the general title itself. What was tip number 1?
Sure.
10.
So we had coming in at number 10, we had stabilize the environment, right? So this would be important to know the conditions of the temperature and relative humidity. You want to also come in at number 9, we had mold, which is the common factor we have throughout the Caribbean due to the climate we have. Like today, it's a rainy day. So that moisture and that darkness and temperature fluctuation will produce mold spores and will help that to germinate. So mold was coming in at number 9. At 8, we have contamination, which always deals with flooding, like we have in Port of Spain and South. Floodings that tend to be very drastic. So, and it can also encounter your libraries, your books, any items. So it will have any debris and chemicals that can be very toxic to humans and also your collection. So at number 7, we had handling, but you want to make sure be careful when you're handling wet paper-based items because it tends to be very weak and it can break and the fibers may be very not suitable for normal handling. So you want to make sure and have that support, those type of boards to lift, and use gloves also when using, well, doing a salvage. For number 5, we had supplies and response. So you want to have the basic needs such as mop buckets, goggles, caution tapes, dust masks, electrical fans, wet and dry vacuums, stuff like that on your list so it can help you assess the water disaster. At number 4, we had limit access. So your access will also be cut off at certain points due to water being still stagnant in your environment that you need to go and carry out a task. So being limited throughout the workspace or the environment is something that you will occur when experiencing a water disaster. Number three, we had prioritizing, which is also a highly important for people who have collections such as rare items. You want to make sure you deal with that aspect before you deal with the general aspect, because the rare items tend to have carry more value towards the person or to the library. So prioritizing is a key aspect. And I think Daniel touched on number two, which is another huge item, which was a curveball, which was mental health. Mental health is something that we want to like advertise there and push throughout the nation, throughout the world. It's very important to have control over yourself and your thinking and take care of your mind, your expressions, your emotions. You want to make sure that's all in contact and you're developed within yourself to carry out the task you're about to take on. Because I mean, at some point
Great.
you'll see your photos that you and your aunt, you may not be alive, something like that. You have to take and grasp the fact that, hey, this could be lost. So take that in mind, mental health. You want to prepare
Thanks so
yourself.
much, Kareem.
I didn't reach number one, but
Thanks.
okay.
Oh, what was number one?
Number one is work and write the plan. I guess you could
Great.
finish that off.
And we mentioned that we have an entire webinar on writing that disaster plan. I wanted to get a chance for Nadia, who has her hand up from quite a while now, to take the floor and ask a question. Thank you so much, Nadia. Can you go ahead?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you
Good
very much
morning.
for the very informative session. I have two questions. Should I ask the both or just ask one now and give other people a chance and come back?
You can ask both.
Okay. All right. So my first question would be, to what extent does an organization get a donor involved in the disaster preparation plan? I know that situation is dependent on the arrangement they would have with the particular donor, but let's just say that there's no arrangement as yet in terms of the disaster plan. How do you get the donor involved? Because some persons, according to what they would have donated to a library, they may want to have more involvement in how things are displayed and how things are preserved, and also if something were to happen, like in our case, we're discussing water disasters, what should take place from there. And the second question, I work at the University of Trinidad and Tobago libraries, and I know that we have persons who, if not present at the webinar, they may view the webinar at some point in time as in members of the public. Now, they may not have access to certain items that organization would buy to preserve preserve things that are important to them. So my question is, do we have, or does NALIS or any organization have items that are relatively affordable for anyone, including organizations, I guess, to be able to access to deal with our climate in terms of mold and mildew and things that would affect your personal items that you want to preserve, and also items that you would have at your library?
Great
Thank you, that's
questions,
it.
Nadia. Thank you so very much, Nadia, for those questions. Let's identify the first one. I think it's maybe a nightmare that we have, that we've borrowed or we've loaned or we have something donated from someone and something went wrong. We have a leak or the items are affected. I think what must be one of the very first things to happen would be that you involve them in communicating about the water disaster occurring. You would find that rather than keeping it secret and potentially hoping, let's deal with it and maybe, I think a lot of times people feel slighted by not being informed as soon as possible when something goes wrong. I think we need to come clear and be honest with our donors that this is the situation. And also that you're not just bringing the situation, you're also telling them exactly the steps that are going to be taken in order to deal with the salvaging. Now, I know it's going to be a difficult one to think of. You're dealing with the salvaging and we're also trying to communicate. And this is where at an institution, it's important to have teams set up. In our Write That Disaster Plan, we highlighted the various roles that are going to be as part of your disaster team. And one of those roles will be somebody who's in charge of communicating perhaps if the institution is going to be closed for a period of time, getting the word out on what is going on, because by silence, you're not helping the situation. By getting the word out, maybe there's an open call for volunteers to assist. Those are the things that that person who takes on the role of communication gets involved with. So it's important to have someone assigned who can handle and deal with that communication. They're not directly involved with, but they're a part of the disaster team, knowing and understanding what's going on, and they're able to communicate to your donor. But this is a really good reminder that we ought to put things in place with our donor agreements, indicating to our donors, hey, should something happen, do we have your permission to do X, Y, and Z? Do we have your permission to maybe temporarily relocate it to another institution, another campus that wasn't affected? Do we have your permission to just temporarily do something or the other that was unexpected in light of this disaster? I think it's going to be really important to communicate with them and get those permissions in advance, but at least if not in advance, that we do it as soon as the disaster occurred and we're able to do that assessment and we're able to give that feedback. Nadia, I hope that one answers the question. You could always give me a thumbs up with respect to that one and looking at donors for salvage. Now, to your second question, of course, the fact that we are considering items that are going to be needed for salvaging, for preservation, you even considered for mold, etc. In our past webinars, we've often tried to pitch it for both the higher end of things for an institution, that library, that archive, that museum that will be able to perhaps afford purchasing the ideal items, as well as looking what could be some simpler alternatives that can be purchased as simply as just a hardware, looking at a pharmacy, a general supermarket, items that can do the job of at least in the intermediate, given that you don't have those more specialized bits of equipment. Through some of our training sessions that we've had, so for instance, workshops, some of our clinics even, we would have mentioned a number of items as they relate to, hey, these are a good alternative. So for instance, one thing, we worked with some micro spatulas and we were talking about, using the flat end of the micro spatula in order to separate a photo that might have been stuck to an album. Somebody said, well, I don't have a micro spatula. What's a good alternative? What we mentioned to them would be a good alternative would be as flat as you can get a butter knife. It's made of a metal, it's smooth, it has a relatively thin edge that works in the same way as a micro spatula. And that could be a good alternative with respect to trying your best to pry and move an item. In our listing, we talk about paper towels. We might even talk about blotters and absorbent pads. But when it comes to it, anything that is able to absorb, so a J-cloth, a towel, bed sheets, anything of the sort that is able to absorb water is what would actually help in those moments. We also want to be sure to include the aspect that I think it's, rather than focusing too much on the material, it's to understand the processes, right? By us understanding that, hey, we want to absorb water without causing damage absorb water in a way that we don't have transfer of any chemicals, you get to thinking that, hey, beyond just blotter or the very expensive material of paper towels, etc., there might be something else that I can substitute, because the concept is we want to absorb water without transferring any chemicals or colorants or dyes or anything like that. And so we can then make the best choice as to what would be a good alternative. I am hoping, Nadia, thank you for your two wonderful questions. Definitely important ones, and I appreciate them. I hope that we got the answers there.
Okay, yes, Ms. Fraser, thank you. Yes, it was very helpful. And also the YouTube videos that NALIS has that you all organize for organizations and the public, that is quite commendable. So yes, I will check it out. And yes, the answers were quite helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. Thanks so much for joining us here. We have one more question. Sorry, no, not a question. From Michelle. She says the preparation plan must stress the importance of continuous staff training, as I believe this will sensitize persons to the significance of their institution's holdings and ensure buy-in. Definitely, Michelle, I could not have agreed with you more. That preparation and training staff and having them come to understand, like you said, the significance of what we're storing, what we're putting into our collections, definitely that is what would drive folks to be able to step in and step up whenever disaster occurs and to lend that assistance. Thank you so much, Michelle. Also, we have a comment saying this was a fantastic session. Well done, PACLab. Thank you so much, B. Philip. Good day. Thank you for a very informative session. I have no questions at this time. Thank you, Raj Pat F. And I think we have all of the questions covered. I thank everyone for joining us for our final webinar of the Preservation Webinar Series. This is our season 3. And of course, be sure to follow along with us and to even look back at how we've been celebrating our PACLab Turns 10 anniversary. I hope you'll check out our website, all our social media channels, follow the hashtag PACLab Turns 10, and you can see all of the action that's been going on. Thank you so very much, everyone.